estimated that John Wayne Gacy murdered at least 33 people. And what is most remarkable about his story is how long he went unpunished as a serial killer. Gacy defied the stereotype of the lonely, disturbed serial killer. Even as he tortured his underage workers and murdered people, he managed to get married twice, start a family, and enjoy widespread social acclaim. As if that weren't enough, his smiling mug shot after his arrest conveys a total lack of humanity, making him a disturbingly cheerful and garrulous serial killer. What's so shocking about Gacy is how brazen he is. He targeted people from his own neighborhood and made minimal efforts to cover his tracks. He was a popular, social man up until the time of his arrest, even though law enforcement had known for years that he was a violent offender. Understanding the timing of events is crucial for determining how Gacy was able to evade capture for so long. To that end, I've included a timeline of the life and death of serial killer John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, according to biography. His childhood was difficult because he was born with a congenital heart defect that kept him from joining in on typical childhood activities and made him an outcast at school and in the community. According to Killer Clown, Gacy's father was an angry alcoholic who would verbally abuse him, calling him a mama's boy or a sissy, and frequently beating him with a leather strap. His father disapproved of Gacy and saw his heart condition as evidence of his weakness. Gacy's abnormal behavior began at a young age. According to Buried Dreams, Gacy was just 7 years old when he was discovered in 1949 with a neighbor boy and the boy's younger sister. There were 3 of them, and the boys were allegedly messing with the girl while they were all naked. Gacy's father became furious and beat him again as a result of the incident. The same report claims that in the same year, Gacy began following around a family friend who worked as a contractor. Gacy had expressed an interest in construction, so the friend of Gacy's dad was happy to take him along. The friend, however, molested the child by repeatedly luring him into wrestling that was actually something much more sinister. Gacy kept quiet about these occurrences because he was afraid of how his father would react. John Wayne Gacy had a terrible upbringing that didn't improve with age. At 19, Gacy's father reportedly lent him the money to buy a car, but he had to pay it back. Father threatened to take away Gacy's car keys when he fell behind on payments. Gacy was unemployed and unhappy, so he decided to leave. One day he just up and left, taking his belongings and heading west. Killer Clown claims that during his time in Las Vegas, Gacy worked as a mortician's assistant at a funeral home. George Wikowski, Gacy's former boss, recalled him as a polite and pleasant young man. According to Cosmopolitan, Gacy was allowed to sleep on a cot in the mortuary's back room because he lacked the funds to rent a proper apartment. According to the same account, he was once so enraged by the sight of a dead boy that he climbed into his coffin. He was so shaken by the ordeal that he quickly made his way back to Illinois. The next step for Gacy was to get a job at a shoe factory and become involved in the junior chamber, aka the JCs. Gacy eventually seemed to put his life in order and become a productive citizen. Apparently, Gacy met his future wife, Marlene, at the shoe factory where they both worked in Illinois. This is according to Cosmopolitan. According to The New Yorker, Gacy and his wife tied the knot in 1964, before he had his bizarre sexual encounter. Gacy got drunk at a friend's house, passed out, and woke up to his friend assaulting him. Gacy didn't stop himself from engaging in the behavior, and was tortured by the knowledge that he had actually enjoyed it. According to Slate, Gacy and Marlene relocated to Waterloo, Iowa in 1966, where the latter was given a position managing 3 KFC restaurants, owned by his father-in-law. Killer Clown claims that Gacy's father-in-law didn't like him, but he paid him well and gave him a bonus to make his daughter happy. It is revealed in Buried Dreams that Marlene and Gacy had a son in 1966 and a daughter in 1967. Gacy was soon a well-known figure in his neighborhood thanks to his work with the JCs, his new family, and his business savvy. He took advantage of his authority by opening a club in his basement and throwing parties there for his underage workers, where they drank and watched pornographic films. In addition, Killer Clown reveals that Gacy hung out with a posse of fellow JCs who engaged in activities such as gambling, hiring sex workers, viewing porn, and even spouse swapping. The New Yorker claims that the first time law enforcement officials encountered John Wayne Gacy was in 1968. Two teenaged former employees of Gacy's have come forward with allegations of sexual assault dating back over a year. A young employee at one of Gacy's KFC restaurants was offered a ride home one night, but instead, Gacy took him to his own home because his wife was in the hospital giving birth to their daughter. Gacy drugged the young man with alcohol, exposed him to pornographic material, and choked him to death. Later that night, he drove him home, and the next morning, he was let go from his job. Another young man claimed that Gacy had shown him pornographic material in order to get him to engage in sexual acts with him. The charges came quickly after, and Gacy insisted on being subjected to a polygraph, which he ultimately did not pass. The book Killer Clown claims that Gacy employed the services of another teen, Russell Schroeder, to threaten one of Gacy's witnesses. Schroeder talked the young man into going on a long road trip with him. There, he beat the kid senseless and tried to submerge his head in water after spraying mace in his eyes. The young man broke free and ran away. According to Esquire, Gacy was found guilty of sodomy in May of 1968 and given a 10-year prison term. With only 18 months under his belt, he was released on parole in 1970. Gacy was arrested and charged with sexual assault in 1967 after two teenage accusers came forward. According to Killer Clown, Gacy was sent to the Iowa Psychopathic Hospital for a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. There, he displayed erratic behavior, shifting from helpfulness and friendliness to boasting about his wealth and power, frequent crying, and hostility if his version of events was questioned. Doctors who examined Gacy came to the conclusion that he had antisocial personality disorder, APD, a condition characterized by unsocialized behavior that puts one at odds with the norms of society. According to Stanford magazine, many people use APD as a synonym for psychopathy. Gacy's sanity was never ruled in question. As he never claimed to be influenced by or under the control of any outside force, he was deemed competent to stand trial. It was obvious, however, that he was the type of man who committed crimes for their own sake, rather than out of any more logical motivations like retribution or spite. Gacy testified at his trial that he and the boys had engaged in sexual activity, but only as an experiment in which both parties gave informed consent. He was given a 10-year prison sentence, despite the judge's recommendation that he be given probation based on his diagnosis. John Wayne Gacy's wife of 3 years, Marlene, filed for divorce after he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and convicted on charges of sodomy, per Killer Clown via Esquire. New York Times reports that Marlene was granted a divorce on September 18, 1969 on the grounds of cruel and inhuman treatment, despite Gacy's angry refusal to cooperate. She also received sole legal and physical custody of their children. Marlene, on the other hand, insisted she was shocked by the news of Gacy's behavior and denied ever being afraid of him. She said that she found it hard to believe that he could be gay because he was such a good father. She divorced her husband and remarried, and later she would only grant interviews on the condition that no one reveal her new identity. Killer Clown claims that Gacy last saw Marlene at a divorce hearing in 1969. He apparently made no effort to contact his family after his release, and after never seeing his children again, he began telling people that they had all died. John Wayne Gacy was released from prison in 1970 after serving 18 months for sodomy, as reported by Esquire. It's incredible how quickly and easily he was able to start over after being set free. He uprooted to Chicago, where he bought a house and opened a building company. In his new community, he quickly rose to prominence after getting involved in politics and hosting regular parties. In addition, he tied the knot with a second wife, Carol Horff. According to an article published in The New Yorker, Horff and Gacy went on a date together back when they were in high school. Her rekindling of her relationship with Gacy began after her 1971 divorce from Horff. Gacy told Horff he was bisexual and had legal issues, but Horff didn't believe him. 9 days after Gacy's arrest for assaulting a young boy and then trying to run him over with his car, in July of 1972, he married Horff, whose 2 daughters got along well with Gacy. It is unknown whether or not Horff was aware that the charges had been dropped. But unfortunately, the marriage didn't last. According to Oxygen, Horff suspected Gacy of cheating on her. At the house and in Gacy's car, she discovered pornographic photos of men and the wallets of teenage boys. Horff was so unwilling to accept the truth about her husband's sexuality that she used his extramarital affairs as grounds for divorce in 1976. John Wayne Gacy served time for sodomy and then moved to Chicago, where he opened a construction company and continued his criminal career. Gacy rose to fame after regularly attending community events and parties while disguised as Pogo the Clown. The legacy of horrific violence, however, was drawing closer and closer to him. In 1971, Gacy allegedly attempted to assault a boy he picked up at a bus station, as reported by Esquire. Gacy was detained, but the charges against him were dropped due to his juvenile delinquency. On another occasion in January 1972, Gacy reportedly went to the bus station to pick up a young boy named Timothy McCoy. He drank alcohol and had sex with McCoy before killing him with multiple stab wounds. Gacy hid McCoy's body in the basement of his home, in a crawl space. According to the Chicago Tribune, Gacy murdered his second unidentified victim in 1974. Then, suddenly, in the span of time between July 1975 and December 1978, Gacy went on a horrifying killing spree, taking the lives of at least 31 more young boys and men. He allegedly kept burying their bodies in the basement or under the house, as reported by The New Yorker. Carol, his wife, smelled something terrible, but Gacy blamed a broken sewer pipe. John Wayne Gacy's criminal activities were first suspected by authorities in January of 1976, her biography. According to Esquire, police in Gacy's hometown looked into the disappearance of 2 young boys who had worked for his construction company, but ultimately decided not to press charges. In 1976, police staked out Gacy's house after a missing 9-year-old boy who had been described as a child prostitute. They questioned a number of young male visitors to the house, but gleaned no useful information from them. Unbelievably, more and more warning signs appeared. The Chicago Tribune reported in March 1977 that Gacy had lured a man named Jeff Rignall to his home, knocked him unconscious, handcuffed him, and then assaulted him. The case was settled in civil court, however, and Gacy was only charged with misdemeanor battery. When Gacy was arrested in December for allegedly kidnapping and assaulting a teenage boy, the prosecutor decided not to press charges. In the end, in December of 1978, a high school senior named Robert Priest disappeared after leaving work at a Des Plaines, Illinois pharmacy. Before he vanished, Priest had told his mother he was going to talk to a man about a construction job. Within a week of Priest's meeting with Gacy, the police had already arrested him and found the skeletal remains of his victims in the basement of his home. John Wayne Gacy, who had committed violent crimes for decades, confessed to them almost immediately after his arrest. The Chicago Tribune reports that after only 1 day in custody, Gacy confessed to killing 32 young men and boys with whom he had sexual encounters. Strangely, he wrote his confession in the third person and even provided maps and diagrams to show where his victims' bodies were buried. The New Yorker reports that the prosecutor decided against recording the confession, and that Gacy later denied making any such statement. On February 6, 1980, Gacy's trial began, and he was charged with 33 counts of murder, as reported by Esquire. Britannica reports that his legal team tried to use a defense of insanity, presenting testimony from multiple doctors who claimed he suffered from schizophrenia. After 5 weeks in court, Gacy was found guilty on all 33 charges in less than 2 hours. In 1980, on March 13, John Wayne Gacy was given the death penalty for his crimes. To prove his innocence, he spent the next 14 years on death row, filing numerous appeals and penning at least 2 books in which he referred to himself as the 34th victim. In an effort to overturn his conviction and death sentence, John Wayne Gacy was very active. According to biography, in 1985 he appealed to the Supreme Court, claiming that his death penalty constituted cruel and unusual punishment. The majority opinion of the court was negative, but Justice Thurgood Marshall wrote a dissenting opinion arguing that Gacy's argument had some constitutional merit, which allowed his appeals to go on for nearly a decade. In 1993, he once again tried to have his case heard by the Supreme Court, but this time, they turned him down. In the end, Gacy's scheduled execution date was set for May 10, 1994. According to the Los Angeles Times, Gacy's last meal included fried chicken, shrimp, and French fries. According to reports, Gacy was cooperative and relaxed. As he was being strapped into the gurney to receive a lethal injection, he told officials that his death wouldn't compensate for the loss all the other lives, but he made no effort to halt the execution. According to AP News, 23 relatives of his victims were present to see him executed. When a technical glitch forced officials to halt the procedure, they gave Gacy a sedative, and he appeared to fall asleep. After being administered a synthetic version of the poison curare, his death was officially recorded at 12:58 a.m. The conviction of John Wayne Gacy in 1980 and his subsequent execution in 1994 appeared to be the final chapter in his gruesome saga. Many people have not been able to get over the fact that 8 of Gacy's victims were never identified. In 2011, the Cook County Sheriff's Office announced a renewed effort to identify these young men using cutting-edge genetic testing technology, as reported by Esquire. According to biography, skeletal remains of the 8 victims were exhumed, and families of young men reported missing in the 1970s were asked to come forward with DNA samples. CBS Chicago notes the immediate success of the effort when victim number 19 was revealed to be William George Bundy, who had been missing since October 1976. 6 years after he went missing in August of 1976, James Byron Harkinson has been named by CNN as victim number 24. Meanwhile, Francis Wayne Alexander was named as victim number 5 in an October 2021 article published in the Washington Post, pictured. Alexander's family never reported him missing because they believed he had simply moved on and avoided them. While recent advances in genetic testing have provided some hope for identifying 5 of Gacy's victims, those efforts may be doomed in the absence of physical samples and police reports.